Hi, my name is Matthew Brooks, and I'm a counselor at Restore, Rebuild, Reconnect Counseling Center. And I'm excited to speak with you today about mental health in musicians and highlighting within that common issues and some just practical strategies that may support not only musicians, potentially therapists who are working with musicians, and also those who are even considering maybe going into the music profession. So outside of my work as a counselor at Restore, Rebuild, Reconnect, I've been an orchestra conductor and music professor for nearly 15 years. And in this career, I've witnessed and even lived through really the costs of our training and our profession from a wellness and mental health standpoint. What many of us don't recognize or understand is that the pursuit of musical excellence often comes with high levels of stress and anxiety and perfectionism and other mental health concerns, to the point where it's really essential that educators, music professionals, and those in the mental health professions talk about these issues more openly. And that's really my hope with this video today. Now, our time together, I hope to share a bit about the common mental health issues among musicians, um, share some background of how music training has historically perpetuated these issues, and then talk about some strategies and interventions that could support musicians who may be struggling with, with mental health concerns as a result of their profession. Now, apparently, this is what AI thinks a music conductor, professor, and therapist look like all combined in one. Apparently, I need to increase my level of books on bookshelves. But I do want to share a bit about my journey and interest in this topic, as I do recognize that I sort of come at an intersection that is a bit unique, but it's certainly it makes a lot of sense to me as to how I got here. Now, of course, I had some interest in therapy and counseling early on, but like many high achievers with ambitious goals, I had my 15-year plan of education and job aspirations. And so I just didn't really have time to study or even consider going into a mental health profession. Um, However, now at this point in my career, I find that it's a really important and meaningful time for me to look back and also look ahead at what my future holds, kind of harnessing both sides of my professional identity now, the music side, the educator side, but now also the therapist side of me. And so, to share a little bit of how I got to this intersection, I am the director of orchestras at the University of Nebraska at Omaha, where I teach music classes, lead a number of orchestras, and teach graduate orchestra conducting. But one of my roles has been in creating the Nebraska Medical Orchestra back in 2018. And this orchestra is for medical healthcare professionals and students as a means of wellness. So, as an intervention, in a sense, for wellness, because of the high stress and burnout rates that existed even pre COVID for healthcare providers and students, but also now post COVID as well. This work with the medical orchestra really opened me up a lot to the benefits of music and participating in music on one's wellness. And now, at this point in my career, having made this journey into mental health myself, I've now sort of turned the tables and I want to look back within the music profession and focus on the mental health of musicians and how we can improve the mental health in our training and within our professional and academic music communities in general. And the thing that reminds me and motivates me every day is seeing students come to my office at UNO and seeing the struggles that they're still having, recognizing myself in some of those struggles, and seeing that we still have a lot of work to do in bringing music training and the music professions to a healthier place. And so I hope that in sharing this video, I encourage others to participate in this and support those musicians in their lives. Now, looking at the research, musicians face a unique set of psychological challenges, often at significantly higher rates than their peers in other fields of study. Studies like this one or two here shown below have shown that music students report higher symptoms of anxiety and depression when compared to their peers in medical, psychology, or sports related majors. And what's believed is that the competitive nature of music combined with intense performance pressure can contribute to chronic stress, self-doubt, anxiety, depression. And it's interesting because in the university setting, and I'd say in other aspects of society as well, many folks often stereotype music and other performing arts as, easy compared to maybe, say, STEM fields, often because they are things that individuals might already enjoy doing, and the training may appear less academically strenuous. So not only are these people, doing something they enjoy, but it's easy to do it. Even some music students themselves think that studying music will just be fun. But the reality is there is still plenty of theory, history, and analytical courses on top of just the sheer applied development of musical skills, how to manipulate an instrument to, an expert level or one's voice, that even some of these new students in music will drop out. And so we could similarly look at, say, a math major who says, I love math. Math classes may come easy to that person, but there's certainly still going to be math classes that are demanding and make it difficult. And so sometimes folks who believe these stereotypes about music and other performing arts are just basing it on ignorance or just really not knowing the depth that goes into making a professional musician. Now, outside of these, anxiety, depression, we also see issues with an increase in behavioral addiction. And this can often be manifested as a practice addiction or, which is sort of an unofficial subcategory of like a work addiction or study addiction, which is starting to get more and more, more of a foothold in research. And these things really come oftentimes as a result of maladaptive perfectionism. Now, outside of these behavioral addictions, stemming from practice, study, work, there are, of course, a prevalence for substance use disorders and addiction. And this comes with anyone who, can find an unhealthy coping strategy to manage or to attempt to manage anxiety or depression by turning to a substance. However, as we know, that cycle perpetuates and it can often get worse, which is why we look at these things as a substance use disorder and an addiction. Now, these challenges that musicians face are often reinforced by the traditional culture of music training, which you usually find at a conservatory-type institution. In these institutions, there are often intensely high expectations, very, very regular social comparison, almost normalizing social comparison, and then rigorous evaluation. And this evaluation can often come in the form of just, always striving for perfection and then being told that it's not good enough. Or being told that it's, how you interpret something and the emotions that you feel behind a piece of music are not good enough or not right. So again, there is this difficult link to identity because emotions and expressive arts do come from within, whether we say it's from within the soul, but it's certainly from within, and then being told that it's not right or it's not good has significant impact. And so these environments that have these high expectations, the comparison, the evaluation, it creates a space that is just psychologically and emotionally taxing for musicians. And it still remains true for students today. Even as a faculty member, I still see these same things because, a lot of faculty say, well, I was trained in this way and it worked for me. So therefore, I must give you and put you through the same trials and tribulations that I had to go through so that you will also be successful. It almost sounds a bit like the cycle of abuse within a family, for instance, a parent who was abused as a child, and then this is how then they raise their children, and the cycle continues and continues. Unfortunately, many professional musicians, particularly of my age and older, have probably experienced abusive teachers. And generally, I don't mean physically abusive, although there are instances of that, but more psychologically and emotionally abusive teachers who are placing demands and making very personal attacks rather than separating out the skill or the task or the goal from the individual. Also, many of us in professional music have probably experienced unrealistic career expectations and just disillusionment about the profession, especially about the financial aspects of it, the reality of piecing together a career, and then limitations on the autonomy over our artistic expression, as well as this sense of identity foreclosure. And so, identity foreclosure, this is something that happens when someone hasn't had a chance to explore other identities outside of music because of the pressures put on them. And I really relate and connect with this myself. I see a number of individuals within music who experience identity foreclosure, but also other high achieving professions. So healthcare, this is often very prevalent, especially when there are parents who are healthcare, doctors, and then their kids are expected to be doctors. So there is just this expectation placed on someone of what their identity is or will be, as opposed to really having the opportunity to explore. And so what happens is that these pressures are put on them. We choose, or we are falling into this identity, and we end up tying our identity and value and self-worth to our musical ability, our successes and failures in our career, and our aspirations. And so it's really hard to separate then that identity from the profession as a musician, or these other high achieving fields. So it's really vital that we work towards strengthening also the identity of individuals, and recognizing that if we already have this link in our identity as profession and in person, in order to improve mental health, this often requires professional intervention to support individuals who've already linked these things together. So one of the key things that we can do to support, musicians, is building their resilience. And this is just the key to overcoming their challenges. Now, resilience is the capacity to adapt successfully in the face of difficulty. It's not necessarily about eliminating stress or avoiding challenges, but it's rather learning how to navigate these issues in a way that fosters growth and adaptability. So in other words, it's really how we bounce back after challenges. Now, within the field of music, fostering resilience can empower students and young musicians to handle setbacks, constructive criticism or just flat out criticism, and performance-related stress in just healthier ways. And it's probably the most important piece that is the most underdeveloped for musicians. Now, there are some strategies to improve resilience, and Daniel and his team highlighted some factors that do improve resilience. One of them is encouraging mentorship opportunities. Now, young people or mentees or students often benefit from seeing those that they admire acknowledge and navigate setbacks effectively. This essentially normalizes failures and it shows others how we can bounce back from these challenges. So, for instance, we are showing that failure is a normal part of the process and that setbacks happen and there are ways to overcome it along the journey. We see others that we respect do this, and then therefore we believe in that capacity in ourselves, and we start to learn some of that adaptability within our own cognitive processes. Another way is promoting risk taking. And risk taking and creative exploration allows students in performing arts and music to step outside of their comfort zones, but in a supportive environment where, again, failure is reframed, but again, as part of the learning process. So, taking risks, trying something new, maybe putting their music away and going from memory this time to see what it feels like, or improvising when they mess up to take that step outside of their normal comfort zone of here's my music, here's my metronome, here's my teacher, here's my safe space, but saying, okay, I'm going to take a step out of this zone where everything is really comfortable, because the likelihood is when we're out on a performance stage, when we're in an audition setting, when we're within an ensemble with others around us listening, all of this comfort is not going to exist in the same way that it does here. And so we need to know what that feels like. And if we have some moments of failure or we have these setbacks, we can reframe this and we can learn to reframe this as, okay, not everything was bad. This was an opportunity and this is part of my learning process. And so this is a really important step, I think, for music students particularly. Part of this process is discussing and even maybe simulating potential failures. So I often like to discuss, what are some potential failures? What could happen? Not in a way to provoke anxiety, but to discuss things that could happen. Your string could break on a violin. Your instrument, could freeze up. You could have a memory slip. You could, X, Y, Z. So discussing potential failures in a safe space gives us the mental fortitude and space to really think through, to work on our cognitive, adaptability, and also work on our problem solving in a way that's safe, so that when we are on stage, when we are in a high stress situation, we've already been promoting this problem solving and promoting this adaptability, that if it were to happen in vivo, we are prepared for being adaptable, being able to shift on the fly and being able to solve a problem, even if it's not one that we've discussed and or simulated. So coping strategies are essential for managing stress, for preventing burnout, and just fostering long-term well-being. We can also employ coping strategies to modify how we think or act as a result of like a distressing situation. And so truly everything that I'm talking about in this video is a coping strategy in some way, shape, or form. But let's talk about some evidence-based techniques that are coping strategies taken from DBT. And so DBT, or dialectical behavior therapy, was created by an American psychologist named Marsha Linehan in the 1970s, and it was widely used for like serious mental health conditions like personality disorder, chronic suicidal behaviors, to now even just more common issues of emotional distress and dysregulation. And essentially, the dialectical behavior therapy is balancing two opposing truths. So acceptance, but also change. And so this is done while focusing on four core skill areas. And so one is managing intense emotions. Another is tolerating distress. Third is improving relationships. And the fourth is remaining mindful. Now, mindfulness in its own right is bountiful with interventions, but mindfulness is really all about acceptance of the present and connecting with our body and our experience and that around us without judgment. And the key element here is judgment. Because so often we say, oh my gosh, I'm noticing that my hand's shaking. Oh my gosh, my hand is shaking. But there is an element of judgment to that. And so if you are trying to play your violin and your fingers are shaking, your hand is shaking, the more you think about that, and the more you worry, and the more you say, "Oh, that's bad. I can't do proper vibrato if my hand is shaking. I'm not relaxed." We are experiencing and connecting with our body in not a judgment-free way. We are judging the situation, so we're not accepting what's happening. A different approach might say, "I recognize that my hand is shaking, and that's okay because I can still play my instrument. I can still focus on what I'm doing." And I must just be a little bit nervous or a little bit tense. Maybe I'll think about relaxing a little bit. And so we're approaching it from a more accepting way and connecting to our body and our experience, again, without judgment. And so mindfulness is a really key tool as a coping strategy. And there's a whole plethora of ways to work through mindfulness, whether it be meditation, guided imagery, so many different ways. But truly, it's ultimately about connecting to our body and being aware, accepting of our present without judgment. Another evidence-based coping strategy from DBT is TIP, or temperature, intense exercise, paced breathing, and progressive muscle relaxation. And so these are 4 steps. And so that's why you can think of them either as steps or 4 possible ways to cope with distressing situations. And so within TIP, the first one is temperature. And so this has to do with cold temperature sort of activating our parasympathetic nervous system. So an ice bath for our face, or a very cold face cloth applied to our face, or standing in a freezer that's very, very cold. It's meant to, how it's thought to work is based on the mammalian dive reflex, where we dive into this cold water, and it slows our heart rate. Our body slows our heart rate. It directs our blood to the brain and the heart, the most important places. And this essentially activates that parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest side of things versus the fight or flight side. Now, the intense exercise of TIP has a similar effect. It's just that in this case, we do some really intense exercise for a few minutes to increase our heart rate, almost leaving us breathless, which helps us to release this stored up energy in our body. So then we can feel and be aware of the wave of relaxation afterwards. So a key element to this is the contrast of intense energy, intense exercise, taking us then to a wave of relaxation and sort of being present in that and feeling that relaxation. So as a way to take our mind, our body, our energy away from this distressing situation into relaxation. Another way to do that is through paced breathing. And so there are a variety of breathing exercises. But one example of paced breathing is maybe like box breathing, where you breathe in for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, breathe out for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, and then repeat that over and over again. Not only are we activating the parasympathetic nervous system in a different way by this paced breathing, we're promoting relaxation and reducing our body's physiological response to stress. We're also focusing our mind on a proactive activity. And so that's also distracting our mind a bit from this distressing situation. And so this has a similar effect to the others. This one, of course, is intentional in a different way, where we're focusing on our breath as opposed to focusing on maybe our presence in our body in mindfulness. And the final P in TIP is progressive muscle relaxation. This is where we reduce stress, anxiety, and just physical tension by systematically releasing muscular tightness. And so this is actually something we may hold tightness and tension already, but this is something where we actively make tension. We actively create muscle, tension, so that then the contrast is again a key piece here, where we progressively release the tension in parts of our body, so that we can then feel the contrast of what tension felt like to now the relaxation. And so this is something that a number of musicians can use, for instance, in their violin bow hold, or a conductor's baton, or a pianist tension at the keyboard. Can actively engage some of the muscles that we use, and then feel the contrast of the intense relaxation. So not only again is it a proactive action that we're setting our mind to, but it is something that physiologically impacts our body, to feel better and to feel more stressed and able to manage a situation. Now, of course, another way, coping strategy or way to address our body and our mind in a distressing situation is using the DBT stop method. And this is seemingly quite simple. You stop, you take a step back, whether physically or just mentally and emotionally. Observe, and again, it may be observing our environment, observing our body, observing our thoughts, and then when it's safe to do so, proceeding forward. And so for those who are involved in some CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes, this is sort of like thought stopping. In this case, though, we may be stopping an actual action or activity as opposed to just stopping a thought. Now, this could include just stopping a thought. It may just, I'm going to stop what I'm doing. Maybe it's a thought that we're having. Maybe it's an activity. Maybe it's playing my instrument. I'm going to take a step back from my piano. I'm going to take a step back from my thoughts. I'm going to take a step back from my feelings, from the distress, to observe what's going on in my environment, observe what's going on with my body. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? And then when it's safe, when I'm calm, when I've redirected some of that, I'll proceed forward again. And so essentially, it's just taking us out of this pattern or this cycle that we can easily fall into, and giving us a proactive, like you may even have to say stop, like one might do with thought stopping, for instance. So the way that we talk to ourselves really matters, and negative self-talk, for instance, reinforces self-doubt and fear, while positive self-talk enhances motivation, confidence, and self-efficacy. Unfortunately, though, many musicians develop patterns of self-criticism that can be deeply ingrained and detrimental to their well-being as a result of the training, the experience, the feedback, whatever it may be. But then what goes on in the mind of the musician is often, I'm not good enough. I can't do this. I'm not going to be successful. I sound bad. This is terrible. All sorts of just negative self conversation going on. And perfectionism is often part of the reason why we have this negative self-talk. Perfectionism is really quite often seen as a desirable trait in music training. We often say, practice makes perfect, and we're going to strive to be as perfect as possible, as we practice musical excerpts. But when it becomes problematic, it really can have serious negative effects. So maladaptive perfectionism, the kind of perfectionism we don't want to have, is characterized by unrealistic self-expectations, self-criticism, and fear of failure, often leading to heightened anxiety, depression, and burnout. Musicians and many other artists and high-achieving professionals are particularly vulnerable to maladaptive perfectionism because of the demanding nature of their training and the high stakes associated with it. Now, obviously for musicians, it's not life or death like it may be on an operating table for a physician. However, the high stakes may be that this is, a performance by yourself on a stage in front of thousands of people, and you have one chance to do this to make an impression for the future of your career. And so the stakes may differ, but there are still perceived high stakes, which then impact the perfectionism. Some of the ways that we can combat maladaptive perfectionism comes from CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, like I mentioned before. Now, CBT was created by American psychiatrist Aaron Beck in the 1960s, and it emphasizes that an individual's perception of an event is more powerful than the event itself. So, to clarify that, how we think or perceive events in our lives causes us to feel a certain way. So, changing our automatic thought processes and challenging those other negative beliefs that we may have will improve how we feel. And so, again, how we think impacts how we feel, which then dictates how we act or how we behave. One of the ways that we can use CBT to work on perfectionism, and maladaptive perfectionism particularly, is by appropriate goal setting. So, creating achievable goals and breaking down maybe overwhelming large tasks helps us to reduce that overwhelm and gives us opportunities to celebrate successes along the way. Now, that may sound silly or it may sound juvenile, but truly, if we're thinking like, oh, I need to paint my entire house by next Tuesday, or I need to learn this entire concerto by next Tuesday, that's a really overwhelming task to imagine. And sometimes so overwhelming that we get sort of task paralysis. We don't know where to begin. Or if we do begin, we start that field of negative talk saying, there's no way I'm going to get this done by Tuesday. There's no way. Oh, I'm doing a crappy job painting this room because I'm rushing. Likewise, oh, I'm not going to memorize this concerto. I can't even get through the first movement. How am I going to learn the other three? We start creating this sense of overwhelm, and it starts to get in the way of our motivation, already our self-talk, and how we move forward in the journey. So creating achievable goals along the way, like I'm going to paint the living room today, and then I'm going to work on painting the dining room tomorrow. So in other words, I'm going to work on page 1 of this concerto today and see if I can get it memorized, so that then I can start connecting that with what I'm working on page 2 and start to memorize both pages tomorrow. So creating these achievable goals not only breaks down this overwhelming task, but it also gives us opportunity to say, hey, look, I did that. Like, have a moment of joy where we can inject some positive self-talk. Like, look, I did that. I'm actually doing a good job on this first page. I'm really excited to then see what I can do for the rest of this first movement. Or, wow, my paint color is really great, and I did a great job on these edges. I guess, it's not going to take me as long as I think tomorrow when I start the dining room. So it really just helps us to have a more positive outlook, create some successes, and minimize or put into an achievable, attainable, approachable form a overwhelming task into these smaller, achievable tasks. Another way that we can look at some of this maladaptive perfectionism is by challenging all or nothing thinking and some of the other cognitive distortions that may exist. Now, all or nothing thought patterns often label situations as totally successful or totally a failure. And this is a very common cognitive distortion that many of us have in many different parts of our life. So for instance, it could be, oh, my solo today was just terrible. I sucked. It was just a total failure. Instead of saying like, oh, you know what? I had a few weird pitchy notes, but overall, I really did a good job, musically shaping the phrase and projecting into the concert hall. Generally a situation is not going to be all bad or just all good. There's going to be elements of each. And this all or nothing thought pattern is one that can really get in the way of success and get in the way of, this negative self-talk that we're trying to get rid of. Or it can promote this negative self-talk and get in the way of sort of a more positive approach. And so challenging this all or nothing thinking helps us kind of get away from this perfectionism because everything is not going to be perfect. There are going to be elements of success and elements of failure to each event or activity that we encounter. Some of the other cognitive distortions that might be related are like overgeneralization. And this is a broad conclusion based upon one event. So, I had a memory slip today when I performed, and I'm always going to forget my music every time I perform now. That's just an overgeneralization. You're basing every situation in the future now on one event. And you had one, and again, this is also all or nothing thinking. Because we had one memory slip doesn't mean the entire performance was a failure. So you can see how these cognitive distortions can bleed into each other and really be correlated in many different ways. Another common cognitive distortion is catastrophizing. And this is one that we are anticipating the worst without evidence. And so, oh gosh, I'm probably going to have a memory slip in this concert, and then I'm going to be up there on stage, and I'm not going to know what to do. I'm not going to have no notes in my head or anything, and the orchestra is going to have to stop in the middle of the performance, and the audience is going to wonder what's happened, and I'm never going to get hired again. This is just continual layers of catastrophizing where we're just expecting and anticipating the worst possible scenario without any evidence suggesting that any of that is going to happen. So some other approaches, kind of using the CBT, the cognitive behavioral approach, is embracing learning and emphasizing that, there is such a thing as good enough for today. And this kind of goes back to the goal setting that, like, you know what, this is good enough for today. I've done well enough for now. I don't have the whole thing mastered, but this is a good achievement for where I'm at, and I can build on this tomorrow because this is a journey. This isn't one just broad, giant goal. This is one step that's going to get me to success. And recognizing that and embracing learning as part of the cycle and process will really help dismantle perfectionism because you can't just expect to be perfect on day one. We have to embrace these levels of, I did well enough for today. Some of the ways that we might do some of these things is through exposure therapy. And this sounds like it could be really intense, like, oh, we're going to, throw you on stage, with no clothes on, probably some people's biggest fear, and you just have to see what it's like. Well, no, that's not what we're planning to do. But it may be, sitting in office, in session, thinking through and closing our eyes and sort of imagining an experience where we're performing or where we have a memory slip or walking out on stage and kind of processing the feelings we might have, the thoughts that we're saying to ourselves. What could we do instead? If we are having negative thoughts, what are some of the positive thoughts or the reinforcing thoughts that we can have? To maybe even more, in vivo, like real life exposure therapy, where before I go perform for thousands of people, I'm going to go donate my time and perform at a nursing home or perform for my family or for my partner, or even just for a recording, because that may be in itself, scary enough to record oneself and listen back. And so there are differing levels of what type of exposure might be appropriate for which person, but each of those different experiences, we can work through. What will you be thinking? What can you think? How can you address yourself if you encounter this situation? What's a coping strategy that you can employ if this happens? So really, it's kind of putting together all of these tools, all of these coping strategies in this opportunity to experience it almost as if it were real. So some of the other issues that one should evaluate is identifying personal, professional expectations. So what is it that you believe personally about this profession? Like, what do you expect about it? Now, are they tied to your identity? And so that's the first one, and really key for me, again, because I see this happening a lot. Are your expectations of this profession, this career, is it tied to how you feel about yourself? Is it tied to your personal self-worth? something to consider and something to evaluate when working with a musician or others in these high achieving fields. Are these personal expectations of the profession, are they realistic? Are they based in fact? Are they based in evidence? Or are they things that we just are anxious about, or things that we think may be true about the profession? Have we done our homework? And then also, are they sustainable? Is this expectation really true for the long haul, or is it just true for now? Or is it just true for the person who's reached a certain level in their career, and there are different expectations for somebody in the early stages of their career? Conversely, identify organizations' professional expectations. So, does the role that you would have within the organization that they expect you to have align with your personal expectations? Or is there a mismatch? You think you're going to be XYZ, but really they want you to be performing this. Does that match? Do you feel that your goals, your identity, what you believe you are as a professional in music aligns with this organization's expectation? How much autonomy will you have over your art? Many folks, go into a career in music studying all of these solo works. They become working on excerpts and solos and things that highlight them as a soloist. And then they spend 50 years of their career as a cog, or just a section player within the machine. So in other words, the orchestra. And so in there, they're not a soloist. They don't get to express their personal expressive qualities as much as they would if they were a soloist. And in fact, there's probably even a conductor coming to each rehearsal, each performance, telling them how they want the musicians to perform it. And so is that acceptable to you? Will you have to find other ways to satisfy your soul musically if you don't have the same expressive or artistic autonomy over what you do? And then finally, are you valued? And this can mean a lot of things. This can mean financially. Is the organization valuing you in the way that you feel you should be valued? Are you being valued for your personal and professional contributions? Or are you truly just a cog in the machine and not really valued as an individual? And these are things that you need to identify and sort of assess, not only from your personal perspective, but in a prospective organization's perspective as to how you might fit into their world. So truly, one of the things we already do so well in the arts community is creating a safe space for students, for audience members, for us to feel emotions and have feelings, to have political reflection. I mean, among so many other things that may be difficult just in general society. But the arts is a place where these things can exist and can interact sort of safely. However, so much of this is done at the expense of the artist, the musician, the creator. Much like, teachers, nurses, or others in caring professions. We see a doctor saying, I need to be perfect. I need to be, helping others, but then not spending time helping themselves. Religious leaders are often seen as individuals with high levels of certain challenges because they're spending so much focus on their religious followers. So like a pastor may really care for the people in their congregation, but forgets to care for themselves. And so while we work to nurture safety and beauty for others, we must focus on our personal self-care and destigmatize our own mental health. And so for us musicians that may be watching this video, or those who care for musicians, we need to really start to be aware of that and promoting that. And for the mental health providers who might be watching this video, there's maybe some new layers and new elements that we have to consider just simply because we don't understand or we're ignorant to certain facets of that particular profession. And it may be hard for that individual to express it in a way that really is meaningful. So the quote on the screen here is from a musician who participated in one of the studies mentioned earlier on. And this statement is troubling and certainly something many of us can relate to regardless of our profession. And so, really, for many of us high achievers, we do the thing that we do because we love it and it brings us joy. Many of us therapists probably also feel that. But once it starts to bring us stress and pain, we often don't know what to do with that. So it's vital for us to enhance our coping skills, build our resilience, and identify and reframe our self-talk and reflect on and manage our perfectionism before it becomes too late. I hope that you'll find some of these strategies helpful and that with these skills, other musicians can reflect on music as something that they can turn to as a coping strategy for stress and anxiety and other mental health issues, rather than it being the cause of their stress and anxiety. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, if I can support you in your journey, or if you're looking for a counselor or therapist. I'm happy to look into working with you or speaking with you further on this topic. And I appreciate you joining me today.